Dawn broke over Maria Hernandez's San Diego home as 3 Cartel SUVs rolled up her driveway. Los Zetas enforcers had silenced journalists before, but they missed something crucial in their intelligence. Before writing her Cartel exposé, Maria had called her brother, Colonel James Ramirez. As armed men approached her door, 12 Marine raiders were already in position. The cartel thought they were sending a message to a stubborn reporter. Instead, they'd walked into an ambush planned by the commander of Force Recon's most lethal combat unit. These enforcers were about to learn why some targets were protected by more than just police. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something really special for you. And now, back to the video. Dawn broke over Maria Hernandez's San Diego home as 3 Cartel SUVs rolled up her driveway. Los Zetas enforcers had silenced journalists before, but they missed something crucial in their intelligence. Before writing her Cartel exposé, Maria had called her brother, Colonel James Ramirez. Now, as armed men approached her door, 12 Marine raiders were already in position. The cartel thought they were sending a message to a stubborn reporter. Instead, they'd walked into an ambush, planned by the commander of Force Recon's most lethal combat unit. These enforcers were about to learn why some targets were protected by more than just police. Maria's fingers trembled slightly as she poured her morning coffee, the ceramic mug clicking against the counter. Through her kitchen window, she watched the black SUVs approach with military precision, a skill learned from their former Special Forces members who had betrayed their oath for cartel money. Her journalism had exposed their training camps, their roots, their corruption of local officials. Now they had come to silence her, just as they had silenced dozens before. But Maria wasn't afraid. She checked her watch. 6:15 a.m., right on schedule. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory from their last call. "Let them come, Hermana. They think they're hunters, but they're about to become prey." James had spent 20 years turning Marines into shadows, teaching them to move unseen, strike unseen, and disappear just as silently. Now his best men lay in wait, their thermal scopes tracking each enforcer's movement. The first man out of the SUV carried a gold-plated Desert Eagle, cartel theatrics. The second and third were more professional, their movements betraying their military background. 6 more emerged, spreading out with practiced efficiency. Maria took another sip of coffee, remembering James's instructions. Act normal. Let them think they have the advantage. That's when they'll make mistakes. Through her earpiece, barely, larger than a grain of rice, she heard James's calm voice. 9 tangos, 3 vehicles. Team 1 has overwatch from the east. Team 2 is in position west. Team 3 has your exit route covered, Maria. Start recording. She touched her necklace, activating the hidden camera. Today's story wouldn't just expose the cartel, it would show the world what happened when they targeted the wrong family. The doorbell rang. Maria counted to 5, then walked to answer it, her heart steady now. She had spent her life pursuing truth, shining light into darkness. Today, she would help deliver justice. As she reached for the door handle, she heard James's quiet command, "All teams, execute on my mark." She opened the door to find the man with the gold Desert Eagle smiling coldly. Behind him, his companions spread out, confident in their superiority. None of them noticed the laser dots appearing on their chests, or the shadows moving in her garden. The enforcer opened his mouth to speak his rehearsed threats, but Maria spoke first. "Buenos dias, señores," she said calmly. "I believe you're here about my story." Her eyes flicked to the garden, where a dozen highly trained Marines were about to demonstrate why Force Recon's motto was swift, silent, deadly. The enforcer's smile faltered as he noticed her lack of fear. In that moment of confusion, James's voice came through her earpiece. Execute. What happened next would become legend in both military and cartel circles. The Marine raiders moved like ghosts, emerging from shadows the cartel men had dismissed as empty. Years of training and combat experience unleashed in a choreography of precise violence. The man with the gold pistol never even reached for his weapon before a chokehold rendered him unconscious. His companions reacted with professional speed, but they were dealing with operators who had mastered the art of close-quarter combat in the world's most dangerous environments. Silenced weapons coughed once, twice, rubber bullets designed to incapacitate without killing. James wanted prisoners, for interrogation, not martyrs for the cartel. Maria stood in her doorway, recording everything. Her camera caught the moment when James emerged from the shadows. His movement so fluid it seemed almost casual. He wore no tactical gear, no visible weapons, just the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his life perfecting the art of warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, he addressed the groaning cartel members being zip-tied by his team. Welcome to the United States Marine Corps demonstration of why you don't threaten family. He turned to Maria, his professional mask slipping for a moment to show genuine brotherly concern. You okay, Hermana? Maria nodded, already thinking about how she would write this story. The cartel had thought they were sending a message. Instead, they had given her the perfect ending to her exposé, a demonstration of how their reign of terror could be broken by men and women who still belie. Demonstration of how their reign of terror could be broken by men and women who still belies. The San Diego Police Department's Tactical Operations Center hummed with controlled chaos. Detective Mike Santos watched the surveillance feeds showing Maria Hernandez's house, now a secured crime scene crawling with federal agents. 9 zip-tied. Cartel members sat in separate interrogation rooms, their bravado shattered by the morning's events. On his desk, Maria's latest article draft glowed on the computer screen. Los Zetas' failed attempt, when cartel violence meets military justice. Mike had known Maria for 3 years, since she first started investigating cartel operations in Southern California. He'd warned her countless times about the dangers, tried to persuade her to back off. Now, watching her calmly give her statement to FBI agents, he understood why she'd never seemed worried. The Maria he knew, the fearless journalist who walked into cartel-controlled neighborhoods with nothing but a notebook and a determination for truth, was only part of the story. Detective Santos. The voice behind him belonged to Colonel James Ramirez, and it carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to commanding elite warriors. We need to talk about your cartel investigation. James was still wearing his civilian clothes, looking more like a business executive than one of the Marine Corps' most decorated special operations commanders. But Mike had seen enough combat veterans to recognize the calculated awareness in the man's posture, the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats even in a secure building. Your sister's given us enough evidence to take down 3 distribution networks, Mike said, gesturing to his case files. But this morning's attack changes everything. They're escalating, getting desperate. He pulled up surveillance photos, showing cartel vehicles crossing the border. We've identified 20 more enforcers who entered California in the last week. This wasn't just about silencing Maria, they're planning something bigger. James nodded, his expression hardening. That's why I'm here, detective. What happened this morning wasn't just about protecting Maria. It was about sending a message. He inserted an encrypted drive into Mike's computer, and dozens of files appeared on the screen. My team's been tracking Los Zetas' expansion for months. They're not just bringing drugs north anymore. They're establishing permanent operations in major US cities. Maria's investigation accidentally uncovered their entire infrastructure. The files showed military-style training camps, hidden in the California desert, safe houses in suburban neighborhoods, and lists of corrupted officials. But what caught Mike's attention were the personnel files, detailed dossiers on former military operatives now working for the cartel. These men, James continued, they're not just thugs with guns. They're trained soldiers who've betrayed everything they once stood for. And they're teaching cartel enforcers how to operate like special forces units. Maria entered the room, her reporter's notebook already in hand. And that's why they're so dangerous, isn't it, Hermano? She sat down, her professional demeanor belying the morning's violence. They're not just copying military tactics. They're adapting them for criminal enterprises. Each enforcer team has its own intelligence unit, counter-surveillance experts, even psychological warfare specialists. James's face showed a flash of pride at his sister's analytical skills. Exactly. Which is why this morning's operation wasn't just about protecting you. Those 9 men we captured, they're all former military, from 3 different countries. Their interrogations will give us the intelligence we need to dismantle the entire network. Mike watched the siblings interact, noting how they complemented each other's strengths. Maria's investigative instincts had uncovered the cartel's operations, while James's military expertise had turned their own tactics against them. But they'll retaliate, he said, voicing his main concern. Los Zetas doesn't tolerate humiliation. They'll send everything they have. Let them come, James replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a predator. Every enforcer they send is another operative we can capture and turn. Every attack they plan is another opportunity to infiltrate their organization. He turned to Maria. That's why your next story is so important, Hermana. We need them angry. Need them making mistakes. Maria was already writing, her pen moving across paper with practice speed, a detailed account of their failed attack, highlighting their enforcers' military backgrounds and their escalating presence in American cities. It'll force them to respond, make them reveal more of their network. She looked up at her brother. But we'll need proof to publish, evidence that can't be disputed. James smiled, reaching into his jacket to produce a small hard drive. Everything my team recorded this morning. Body camera footage, thermal imaging, communications intercepts, plus documentation of their training camps and safe houses. Enough evidence to support every word you write. Mike watched Maria review the files, her expression growing more determined with each revelation. This isn't just about one story anymore, she said quietly. This is about exposing how deep the corruption goes, how far they've infiltrated our institutions. And that's why they'll keep coming, James added, his tactical mind already planning ahead. Each enforcer team they send will be better trained, better equipped. They'll study what happened this morning, adapt their tactics. He turned to Mike. Detective, I need your department's cooperation. My team will remain in San Diego, working alongside your officers. We'll teach them how to identify and counter military-style cartel operations. Mike nodded, understanding the implications. The cartel had brought war to American streets, using corrupted military expertise to expand their empire. Now they would face opponents who had mastered those same tactics in the world's most dangerous battlefields. What do you need from us? Everything you have on their movements, their contacts, their safe houses, James replied. Maria's story will flush them out, force them to relocate and restructure. That's when they'll be vulnerable. He pulled up a map showing potential cartel positions throughout Southern California. My team will deploy in 4-man units, providing overwatch and rapid response capability. When they come for Maria again, and they will, we'll be ready. Maria closed her notebook, her expression resolute. They think fear is their greatest weapon, but they've never faced enemies who aren't afraid. She looked at her brother, the bond between them evident in their shared determination. We'll show the world what happens when criminals try to use military tactics against real warriors. As Mike watched the siblings coordinate their next moves, Maria crafting the story that would enrage the cartel, James planning the trap that would destroy them, he realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The cartel had spent years building their empire on violence and intimidation, corrupting the very institutions meant to stop them. Now they faced opponents who understood their tactics, but fought with something stronger than fear. The unshakable bonds of family, duty, and justice. The sun was setting over San Diego as Maria began typing her story, and James deployed his teams throughout the city. The cartel's enforcers would come again, bringing more men, more weapons, more tactical expertise, but this time, they would find their targets protected by warriors who had mastered the art of invisible warfare in the world's deadliest conflicts. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and the streets of San Diego would become their last battlefield. Victor Reyes stood before the ornate desk in Los Zetas' San Diego command center, his scarred hands trembling as he played the surveillance footage. The luxurious office, hidden within a seemingly abandoned warehouse, felt more like a tomb as the cartel's regional commander, Eduardo El Fantasma Torres, watched 9 of his best enforcers being systematically dismantled by invisible opponents. Explain to me, El Fantasma's voice was soft, almost gentle, how a simple journalist managed to defeat our most experienced team. The man's nickname came from his ability to vanish after ordering executions, leaving no evidence, no witnesses. Now, his manicured fingers traced the edge of an ornate letter opener, its blade catching the morning light. Victor swallowed hard. Colonel James Ramirez, Force Recon Marine Raiders, Maria Hernandez's brother. He placed a dossier on the desk. We didn't know about the connection. Our intelligence suggested she was working alone. El Fantasma opened the file, studying James's military record. 20 years of special operations experience, multiple combat deployments, dozens of successful missions against drug networks in Afghanistan. His lips curved into a small smile. So, we're not dealing with just a journalist. We're facing a warrior who spent his life hunting men like us. The office door opened, admitting Isabella Vega, Los Zetas' head of intelligence. Her designer suit couldn't hide the predatory grace of someone who'd learned warfare in Colombia's darkest jungles. The situation is worse than we thought, she announced, placing a tablet on the desk. Maria Hernandez's latest article just went live. The screen showed the San Diego Tribune's website. The headline blazed, Los Zetas Military Connection. How cartels are building private armies on US soil. Below it, high-resolution photos displayed their training camps, safe houses, and corrupted officials. But what made El Fantasma's hand tighten on the letter opener was the body camera footage embedded in the article. Professional operators being taken down with clinical precision by Marines who moved like ghosts. She's not just exposing our operations, Isabella continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. She's showing the world that we can be beaten, that our best enforcers, men we spent years training, can be defeated in their own game. El Fantasma rose slowly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Diego's skyline. Colonel Ramirez isn't just protecting his sister, he mused. He's using her journalism to bait us. Each time we strike, he'll be waiting with cameras and casualties. He turned back to his lieutenants. An interesting strategy. Let's show him how we adapt. Isabella's tablet displayed new files, dossiers on former Special Forces operators from around the world. I've already contracted additional talent. Ex-Spetsnaz, former SAS, retired Delta Force. Men who've studied Colonel Ramirez's tactics, who know how to counter Marine radar operations. And the journalist, Victor asked, trying to hide his nervousness. How do we silence her without engaging her brother's teams? El Fantasma's smile widened. We don't. He returned to his desk, pressing a button that revealed a hidden screen. It showed tactical overlays of San Diego, with potential firing positions marked in red. Maria Hernandez has declared war on us. Her brother has shown us his strength. Now we'll show them ours. The screen filled with more data. Patrol routes, surveillance feeds, communication networks. Colonel Ramirez wants to play a game of shadows. Fine. We'll turn this city into our battleground. Every street, every building, every dark corner will belong to us. He turned to Isabella. How many operators can you deploy within 24 hours? 30 elite combat veterans, all with urban warfare experience, plus our existing networks of spotters and informants. She pulled up personnel, files, each showing operators with extensive counterterrorism backgrounds. They're already studying the Marine Raiders' tactics from this morning's footage. Next time, we'll be ready. El Fantasma nodded approvingly. Victor, take our new operators and establish a perimeter around the Tribune's offices. I want every entrance, every window, every ventilation duct under surveillance. Document their security protocols, staff movements, everything. His voice hardened. But no action yet. Let them see us watching. Let them feel the pressure building. And Maria? Victor asked. Leave her alone for now. Let her write her stories. Let her brother think his tactics are working. El Fantasma's fingers drummed on the desk. Colonel Ramirez isn't the only one who can plan ambushes. While his teams are busy protecting his sister, we'll strike elsewhere. Politicians, judges, police officers, anyone who might support their crusade. Show them that every word she publishes has a price, paid in other people's blood. Isabella's tablet chimed with new intelligence. Our sources inside the police department confirm that Colonel Ramirez has established 4-man teams throughout the city. They're training local officers in counter-cartel operations, setting up safe houses and observation posts. Perfect. El Fantasma pulled up architectural plans for buildings surrounding Maria's house. Let them fortify their positions. Let them think they're in control. He pointed to key locations. Place our best marksmen here, here, and here. I want overlapping fields of fire covering every approach. When the time comes, we'll show them the difference between warriors and killers. Victor studied the tactical displays, his confidence returning. What about our compromised operations? The training camps and safe houses she exposed? Burn them all. El Fantasma's voice was cold. Transfer our resources to secondary locations. Activate our sleeper cells in other cities. If they want to, see our true strength. We'll give them a demonstration they'll never forget. As his lieutenants left to execute his orders, El Fantasma returned to the window. Somewhere out there, Maria Hernandez was writing more stories, thinking she was protected by her brother's elite warriors. Colonel Ramirez was deploying his teams, confident in their superior training and tactical expertise. They thought they were hunting Los Zetas, but they had never faced an enemy who could match their skills and exceed their ruthlessness. The sun was setting over San Diego, casting long shadows across the city. Soon, those shadows would come alive with operators from both sides, hunting each other through streets and alleys, waging an invisible war for control. El Fantasma smiled, anticipating the chaos to come. Maria wanted a story. He would give her an epic of violence and vengeance, written in blood across the city she thought she could protect. "Welcome to our world, Colonel," he whispered, watching darkness fall. "Let's see how well your Marines fight when the shadows bite back." Sergeant Marcus, Ghost Chen, lay motionless on the rooftop of the abandoned office building, his modified M40A6 sniper rifle trained on the Tribune's main entrance. Through his thermal scope, he watched Maria Hernandez working late in her office, the blue glow of her computer screen illuminating her determined face. For 3 days, Colonel Ramirez's teams had maintained an invisible protective net around his sister, watching the watchers, counting cartel observers, and waiting for the real attack to begin. "Shadow 2, movement south of your position," James's voice crackled through his encrypted earpiece. "3-man team, military formation, headed toward the parking structure." Marcus shifted his scope slightly, catching the heat signatures of professional operators moving with practiced precision. These weren't ordinary cartel thugs. Their movement patterns screamed special forces training. "Copy that, command. I count 3 tangos, all carrying suppressed weapons. These guys are different." Marcus had spent 15 years in Force Recon, and he recognized the fluid grace of elite operators. "They're setting up for a long-range shot into Maria's office." James's response was calm, measured. "All teams, maintain positions. Let's see their full deployment before we engage. Ghost, keep recording everything. Maria needs proof of their escalation for her next story." The night air hummed with tension as more cartel operators emerged from the shadows. Marcus counted 12 separate teams, each moving with professional discipline, establishing overlapping fields of fire around the Tribune building. Through his scope, he caught glimpses of high-end tactical gear and customized weapons. El Fantasma wasn't just sending killers. He was deploying a small army of elite mercenaries. "Command, they're recreating our tactics from the house ambush," Marcus reported, noting their positioning. "These guys have studied our playbook. They're expecting us to respond the same way." His thermal scope revealed more heat signatures on adjacent rooftops. Spotters in elevated positions, counter-sniper teams, even guys watching the sewers. They've learned from last time. "Good." James's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "That means they're looking for Marine raiders. They're expecting us to fight like Marines." There was a pause, then. "Too bad we're not going to give them what they expect. All teams execute Operation Ghostwalker. Standard rules of engagement. Apply. We need prisoners for interrogation." Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he activated his rifle's recording system. What happened next would become required viewing in military training courses for years to come. The cartel operators had indeed studied how Marine raiders typically operated, preparing counters for standard Force Recon tactics. What they hadn't counted on was James completely rewriting his team's tactical doctrine. Instead of the expected response teams coming from pre-planned positions, James's Marines seemed to materialize from impossible angles. They moved like urban predators, using maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, and architectural blind spots that weren't on any blueprint. Each Marine had spent days memorizing every inch of their assigned sectors, creating paths of attack that defied conventional tactical wisdom. The first cartel team went down without firing a shot, neutralized by perfectly timed bursts of concentrated riot gas from modified launchers. The second team found their encrypted communications jammed by devices James had hidden throughout the area, their tactical coordination shattered by precision electronic warfare. Marcus watched through his scope as the cartel's carefully planned operation dissolved into chaos. These were highly trained operators, but they were fighting ghosts who seemed to ignore the basic laws of urban combat. Marines appeared behind teams that had thoroughly checked their rear security, disabled weapons that had been meticulously maintained, and turned the mercenaries' own tactics against them. "Shadow 2, you have release authority," James commanded, as the third cartel team tried to fall back to secondary positions. "Show them why they call you Ghost." Marcus's rifle coughed 3 times, each shot delivering a specialized less-than-lethal round that his team had developed specifically for this operation. The projectiles burst on impact, releasing a fast-acting sedative that dropped elite operators in their tracks. 3 more down, command, ready for collection." In her office, Maria continued working, seemingly oblivious to the silent war being waged around her. But Marcus knew she was recording everything through hidden cameras James had installed. Tonight's failed assault would become tomorrow's headline, another blow to El Fantasma's reputation for invincibility. "All teams, report status," James ordered as the last cartel operators were zip-tied and loaded into unmarked vans. "Ghost, what's your count?" Marcus scanned the battlefield through his scope one last time. 27 tangos neutralized, all alive, all appearing to be former special operations. No civilian casualties, no property damage. He zoomed in on their captured equipment. "They're running top-tier gear, boss. Someone's spending serious money to outfit these teams." "Good." James's voice carried the satisfaction of a commander whose plans had worked perfectly. "Detective Santos has interrogation rooms ready. Time to find out who's bankrolling El Fantasma's private army." As police units moved in to secure the scene, Marcus caught movement in his peripheral vision. A shadow where no shadow should be. His rifle snapped to the position instantly, thermal scope revealing a heat signature he'd missed earlier. A lone figure stood on a distant rooftop, watching the operation through high-powered optics. "Command. Possible visual on El Fantasma," Marcus reported, his finger tightening slightly on his rifle's trigger. "Range 800 meters, northeast corner of the Hawthorne building. Request permission to engage." "Negative, Ghost. Let him watch." James's voice carried a predatory edge. "I want him to see exactly what he's dealing with. I want him to understand that every operator he sends will face the same outcome. This isn't about killing. It's about breaking his will to fight." The figure on the rooftop remained for another moment, then melted away into the darkness. Marcus kept his scope trained on the position, recording everything. "He's gone, boss, but he definitely got the show he came for." "Good." James's satisfaction was evident. Maria's story goes live in 3 hours. Every cartel boss in Mexico will see how easily their best operators were defeated. El Fantasma's reputation is built on fear and intimidation. Let's see how he handles humiliation. As the last police vehicles departed with their sedated prisoners, Marcus began breaking down his rifle. Tonight's operation had sent a clear message. The cartel's military expertise meant nothing against warriors who had turned urban combat into an art form. But he knew this was just the beginning. El Fantasma wouldn't take this defeat lightly. "All teams maintain surveillance positions," James ordered. "Ghost, I want overwatch on Maria until sunrise. El Fantasma's watched his best operators fail twice now. He'll either retreat to rethink his strategy, or he'll do something desperate." Marcus settled back into his shooting position, his scope once again trained on Maria's office. She was still typing, her face set with determined concentration. The story she was writing would shake the cartel's foundations, exposing not just their failed operation, but the worldwide network of mercenaries they'd recruited. "Roger that, Command," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a warrior who had mastered his craft. "Let them come. We'll give them more lessons in why you don't bring military tactics against Marines." The night settled into watchful silence as James's teams maintained their invisible protective web around Maria. Somewhere in the city, El Fantasma was undoubtedly planning his next move, but tonight had proven that all his money, all his mercenaries, and all his military expertise meant nothing against operators who had turned urban warfare into a deadly science. The cartel had wanted to silence one journalist. Instead, they'd started a war they couldn't win against shadows they couldn't fight. The interrogation wing of the San Diego Police Department's black site facility thrummed with tension. Detective Santos watched through one-way glass as a former Russian Spetsnaz operator, now working for Los Zetas, stared at the evidence photos spread across the metal table. Each image showed his team's embarrassing takedown by James's Marines, their supposedly perfect operation dismantled with surgical precision. "Your reputation in Chechnya was legendary, Mr. Volkov," James said quietly, his voice carrying neither judgment nor mockery. "So tell me, why would someone with your skills work for a cartel that treats its operators as disposable assets?" He placed another photo on the table, surveillance footage of El Fantasma executing failed enforcers. Volkov's scarred face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "You know how this works, Colonel. Men like us, we're weapons. Someone always pays to point us at a target." His accent was thick, but his English was perfect. "El Fantasma pays better than most." "Paid," James corrected, sliding a tablet across the table. Your offshore accounts were frozen an hour ago. Every mercenary captured last night is being financially dismantled. Bank accounts, properties, investment portfolios, all seized. He leaned forward slightly. El Fantasma's not going to waste money on operators who failed him. You know what happens next. Before Volkov could respond, the interrogation room's door opened. Maria walked in, her reporter's notebook in hand, her presence causing the hardened mercenary to stiffen slightly. "Mr. Volkov," she said, taking a seat beside her brother, "I'd like to offer you an alternative to whatever El Fantasma has planned for you." Detective Santos watched the interaction with growing interest. The Ramirez siblings had choreographed this perfectly. James breaking down the mercenary's professional facade, Maria offering a lifeline. On the table between them, Volkov's own tactical cameras showed how completely his elite team had been outmaneuvered. "I'm writing a story," Maria continued, her voice carrying the same quiet authority as her brother's. "Not just about last night's failed operation, but about the entire network. Former Special Forces operators recruited by cartels, their tactics, their training programs." She opened her notebook. "I already have 47 names. Men like you, warriors who served their countries with honor, now working as cartel enforcers." Volkov's expression cracked slightly. "You don't understand. El Fantasma. He doesn't just kill those who fail him. He destroys everything they care about." His hands clenched. "Families, friends, anyone they've ever tried to protect." James nodded, understanding, "Which is why we're offering full witness protection. Not just for you, but for anyone you need to keep safe." He produced a document bearing federal seals. "The DEA and FBI are building a RICO case against Los Zetas' entire command structure. Your testimony could help us dismantle their organization from the inside." In the observation room, Detective Santos felt a presence behind him. Captain Rodriguez had entered silently, his face grave. "We've got problems," he said quietly. "El Fantasma's responding to last night's humiliation. 3 judges' families have gone missing. 2 police captains' homes were firebombed. He's sending a message. Anyone who helps us will pay in blood." Santos turned from the interrogation. "How many casualties?" "None, thank God. Colonel Ramirez had surveillance teams watching potential targets. Got everyone out before the attacks." Rodriguez's expression hardened. "But that's not the worst part. We've got credible intel that El Fantasma's called in something bigger, something even James's teams might not be ready for." Back in the interrogation room, Volkov had finally cracked. "You don't understand what's coming," he said, real fear creeping into his voice. "Last night's operation. That was just a test, seeing how your teams would respond. El Fantasma. He's been planning something much worse." Maria's pen stopped moving. "What do you mean? Why do you think he hired so many ex-special forces?" Volkov leaned forward. "He's building an army, not just enforcers or hit teams. A full military unit with air support, electronic warfare capability, even specialized combat divers." His eyes met James's. "He's preparing for urban warfare on a scale this city's never seen." James remained outwardly calm, but Santos saw his posture shift slightly. "How many operators?" "Over 100, drawn from elite units worldwide. They've been training for months in secret facilities across Mexico." Volkov's voice dropped lower. "But that's not the worst part. El Fantasma's got people inside your own government. Military officials, intelligence agents, people who can tell him exactly how to counter your tactics." Maria was writing rapidly now, her journalist's instincts sensing an even bigger story. "Names," she said. "We need names." Volkov hesitated, then reached for the tablet. His fingers flew across the screen, pulling up encrypted files. "Everything I know is here. Training locations, command structure, corrupt officials." He looked at James. "But you have to understand, this isn't just about silencing your sister anymore. El Fantasma's using this situation to start something bigger. He wants to prove that his mercenary army can defeat American special operations units. Success here would let him sell his services to cartels worldwide." In the observation room, Rodriguez's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. "Multiple boats just picked up on Coast Guard radar, moving fast towards San Diego from international waters. Thermal signatures suggest heavy weapons, and we've got reports of unmarked helicopters approaching from the east." Santos felt his blood run cold. "They're actually doing it. They're going to try to take on the Marine raiders in open combat." "No," Rodriguez corrected grimly. They're going to try to take over the entire city, create so much chaos that James's teams can't protect everyone, force them to split up, become vulnerable. He was already moving toward the door. Get Maria and the colonel. They need to hear this now. In the interrogation room, Volkov was still talking, revealing details of El Fantasma's master plan. But James had gone completely still, his head tilted slightly, listening to reports coming through his concealed earpiece. Santos watched the Marine commander's expression shift from tactical focus to cold fury. Maria recognized her brother's change in demeanor instantly. "James, what is it?" "El Fantasma's made his move," James said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a warrior preparing for war. "He's launching a full military assault on San Diego. Multiple attack vectors, at least 100 trained operators." He stood, every movement controlled and precise. "He's not trying to silence you anymore, Maria. He's trying to prove that his mercenary army can defeat Marine raiders on American soil." Volkov nodded grimly. "Now you understand. This isn't about one journalist or one story. El Fantasma's using this conflict to demonstrate his power. If his operators can defeat Force Recon Marines in urban combat, every cartel in the world will want his services." James's hand moved to his concealed radio. "All teams, implement contingency plan Delta. I want every backup operator activated, all emergency protocols in effect." He turned to his sister. "Maria, get your evidence somewhere safe. When this is over, the world needs to know exactly why their city turned into a war zone." The sun was setting over San Diego as military-grade helicopters approached from the east and heavily armed boats crossed into U.S. waters. In hidden positions throughout the city, James's Marine raiders checked their weapons and prepared for the biggest urban battle of their careers. El Fantasma had wanted to silence one journalist. Instead, he had started a war that would either break his empire forever or turn an American city into a cartel battleground. The night was about to explode into violence, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, 100 elite mercenaries were preparing to challenge the world's deadliest special operations unit. The hunters and the hunted were about to clash in a war that would rewrite the rules of urban combat. San Diego's emergency services channel erupted with chaos as the first explosions lit up the harbor. James stood in the Tactical Operations Center, watching multiple screens as El Fantasma's forces began their assault. 3 unmarked helicopters, modified for combat operations, circled the outskirts of the city. On the water, 5 high-speed boats packed with mercenaries approached from different directions. "Multiple breach points," Marcus reported from his sniper position, overlooking the harbor. "These aren't cartel thugs, boss. Their formation and movement are textbook special operations." Through his scope, he could see the mercenaries were equipped with military-grade night vision, thermal imaging, and communication systems. James's voice remained steady as he coordinated his response. "All teams, execute Protocol Shadow. Let them think they've got us scattered and reactive." Around the city, his Marine raiders were already implementing a strategy that would turn El Fantasma's own tactical doctrine against him. The first wave of mercenaries hit the harbor district. With professional precision, teams of 4 moved through the shadows, securing key intersections and establishing sniper positions. They expected resistance from local law enforcement, maybe even federal agents. What they didn't expect was the absolute silence that greeted them. "Ghost Team, you have weapons-free authorization," James commanded. "Show them why we own the night." Marcus's rifle barked 3 times, the sound absorbed by his advanced suppressor. 3 mercenary team leaders dropped silently, their sophisticated radio equipment suddenly broadcasting static across their entire network. Before their teams could react, more silent shots picked off their communication specialists and tactical coordinators. "Command, priority targets neutralized," Marcus reported. "Their combat coordination is compromised." In the Tactical Operations Center, Maria watched the screens with a journalist's analytical eye. "They're still following their training," she observed. "Look at how they're adjusting, establishing alternative communication protocols." Her years of investigating cartel operations had taught her to read tactical patterns. James nodded. "That's what makes them dangerous. These aren't criminals. With guns, they're professional soldiers fighting for cartel money." He touched his radio. "All teams, Phase 2. Let's show them the difference between soldiers of fortune and Marine raiders." The city's power grid suddenly went dark in targeted sections, disrupting the mercenaries' careful planning. Streets that had been carefully reconnoitered and mapped were now pitch black, their night vision equipment suddenly worse than useless as James's teams activated specialized infrared strobes that played havoc with their optics. Multiple targets, disoriented and separating, came the report from Team 3, hidden in a position that should have been impossible to reach. They're good, but they're fighting blind now. The mercenaries tried to adapt, switching to backup systems and alternate protocols. But each contingency they activated seemed to trigger a new problem. Communication frequencies were jammed by phantom signals. Thermal scopes showed false heat signatures. Even their most basic tactical movements were disrupted by precisely timed distractions. Contact front. The call came from one of El Fantasma's helicopter pilots. Multiple hostiles, rooftop level. But when his gunner opened fire, the targets vanished. Nothing but carefully placed thermal decoys designed to waste their ammunition and reveal their positions. In his command center across the city, El Fantasma watched his carefully planned operation begin to unravel. "They're not just countering our tactics," he growled. "They're using our own training against us." His hand clenched around his radio. "All teams, fall back to secondary positions, regroup," and the explosion that cut off his transmission was precisely calculated, not to kill, but to disable every piece of electronic equipment in his command center. As backup generators kicked in, he found himself staring at screens showing his elite mercenaries being systematically isolated and neutralized by an enemy they couldn't seem to find. "Sir!" One of his communications officers burst in. "We've lost contact with the helicopter teams. Someone's broadcasting interference patterns that match our encrypted frequencies exactly. It's like they knew our codes before we even used them." Ellie. Phantasma's expression darkened as understanding dawned. "Because they did." He turned to his tactical display, where red dots showing his teams were steadily going dark. "Colonel Ramirez didn't just prepare for our attack. He used Volkov's interrogation to get our entire tactical playbook." Back in the Tactical Operations Center, James watched the systematic dismantling of El Fantasma's forces with professional satisfaction. "All teams, maintain pressure. Drive them toward the containment zones." His Marines had spent days preparing specific areas of the city, turning them into perfect ambush zones that looked like safe rally points to trained operators. Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting everything. "They expected urban warfare," she said, understanding flowing through her words. "But you're not giving them a war. You're giving them a lesson in why Marines don't play by standard tactical rules." James allowed himself a small smile. El Fantasma bought himself 100 elite mercenaries, trained them, equipped them, taught them to fight like special forces. He watched another team of mercenaries stumble into a perfect crossfire, only to be neutralized by non-lethal weapons they never saw coming. But he forgot the most important lesson of special operations. It's not about the equipment or the training. It's about the warriors who turn combat into an art form. The night wore on as El Fantasma's elite forces were systematically taken, apart by opponents they couldn't seem to engage. Every standard operating procedure they attempted was countered before they could execute it. Every tactical advantage they thought they had was turned into a weakness. Every attempt to coordinate their forces seemed to play directly into the Marines' hands. In his increasingly isolated command center, El Fantasma felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. He had spent millions building this force, recruiting the best operators money could buy, equipping them with technology that should have guaranteed victory. But as he watched them being dismantled with almost contemptuous ease, he realized his mistake. He had built an army of skilled mercenaries, men who fought for money and followed tactical doctrines they had learned in various special forces units. But he was facing Marines who had turned urban combat into something beyond mere tactics. Warriors who had evolved past standard military doctrine into something far more lethal. As dawn approached, the last of his helicopter teams reported complete communication failure before going silent. His boat teams were either captured or scattered, their expensive equipment turned into useless weight by the Marines' electronic warfare. And his ground forces, the elite operators he had spent so much time recruiting, were being systematically rounded up by an enemy that seemed to move like smoke through their defensive positions. "Sir," his last communications officer reported, "Colonel Ramirez is broadcasting on our command frequency." The man's face was pale. He says this was just the demonstration. That if we continue our operations in San Diego, next time his teams won't bother taking prisoners. El Fantasma stared at his tactical displays, watching the last indicators of his force's presence fade into static. He had intended to demonstrate the power of his mercenary army. Instead, he had revealed its greatest weakness. At their core, they were just soldiers, fighting for pay, going up against warriors who had turned combat into a calling. As police sirens began to fill the night and federal response teams moved in to collect prisoners, James's voice came through one last time. "Lessons over, El Fantasma. Next time, we won't be teaching. We'll be hunting." The sun rose over San Diego, revealing the aftermath of a battle that had been fought entirely in shadows. El Fantasma's elite mercenary force had been neutralized without a single civilian casualty, their sophisticated equipment now evidence in a federal investigation. And somewhere in the city, Maria was already writing the story that would expose not just the cartel's failed assault, but the fundamental truth about why it had failed. Some battles can't be won with money, equipment, or even professional training. Some enemies can't be defeated by mercenaries, no matter how elite. And some warriors, like the Marine Raiders, who had turned San Diego's streets into their perfect battlefield, operate on a level that mere soldiers for hire could never hope to match. The morning sun illuminated the wreckage of El Fantasma's ambitions. Federal agents swarmed the harbor district, cataloging seized military equipment and processing captured mercenaries. Detective Santos watched Maria interviewing a handcuffed, former SAS operator, her pen moving steadily across her notebook as the man detailed El Fantasma's extensive network of military contacts. 73 captured, 12 escaped, 15 requiring medical attention, James reported, studying the after-action data on his tablet. No civilian casualties, minimal property damage, and enough evidence to launch investigations into 36 corrupt officials. His satisfaction was tempered by professional concern. But El Fantasma's still out there. Maria looked up from her interview. And he's desperate now. Everything he built, all his carefully cultivated connections, we've exposed it all. She handed James a document pulled from one of the captured mercenaries' tactical computers. "Look at this. He wasn't just building a private army. He was creating a template to sell to cartels worldwide. San Diego was supposed to be his demonstration project." Before James could respond, Marcus's voice crackled through their secure channel. "Command, priority alert. Multiple vehicles leaving El Fantasma's compound at high speed. They're burning documents, destroying equipment. Looks like they're implementing emergency evacuation protocols." James's expression hardened. He's cutting his losses trying to disappear before we can track his network back to the source. He turned to Detective Santos. "How fast can you get federal approval for a raid?" "Too long," Santos replied, frustration evident in his voice. "They're still processing the harbor scene. By the time we get authorization, they'll be gone," Maria finished, already reaching for her phone. "But I might have something better." She pulled up a series of encrypted messages. "Remember those corrupt officials Volkov mentioned? One of them just reached out to me. He's afraid El Fantasma will eliminate loose ends before escaping. Wants to trade information for protection." James studied the messages, his tactical mind analyzing angles and implications. "It's a trap," he said finally. "El Fantasma's too skilled to let a real source contact you directly. He's trying to draw us out, split our forces." Maria nodded, her journalist instincts matching her brother's tactical assessment. "Probably, but that means he's still in play. Still thinking he can salvage something from this disaster." She pulled up more data on her laptop. "Look at these financial transfers. He's liquidating assets, moving money through a dozen different shells. Classic preparation for a major operation." Santos leaned in, his detective's eye catching patterns. "These amounts, he's not just running. He's financing something big. One last desperate move to restore his reputation." The tactical operations center's main screen suddenly lit up with urgent alerts. Marcus's voice was tense. "Command, multiple explosive devices just detected in critical infrastructure points across the city. Power stations, water treatment facilities, communication hubs, professional placement, military-grade hardware." James was already moving, his voice carrying command authority. "All teams, implement Protocol Omega. Locate and neutralize those devices. El Fantasma's not trying to escape. He's attempting to hold the entire city hostage." Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard, connecting dots in real time. The message from the corrupt official, the obvious evacuation, the financial movements. It's all theater. He wanted us watching his compound while his real operators planted the bombs. "Smart play," James acknowledged grimly. Use our victory against us. Make us think he's running while he implements his real endgame. He turned to Santos. How many critical infrastructure points does the city have? Too many to cover with. Your current forces, the detective replied, pulling up city maps. Even if we mobilize every available law enforcement unit, we'd never find them all in time, James finished. He studied the tactical display, his mind racing through options. Unless we don't try to find them. A cold smile crossed his face. Maria, how fast can you get a message to El Fantasma? His sister matched his smile, understanding flowing between them. Through official channels. Hours. Through the encrypted network I've been using to track his operations. Instantly. Tell him I want to meet. Just him and me. Professional courtesy between commanders. James's voice carried deadly certainty. He thinks he's still controlling this game. Let's show him why Marines don't play games. As Maria crafted the message, Santos voiced the concern everyone was, thinking, it's suicide. He'll never come alone, and even if he did, he'll come, James interrupted. Because he's a tactician, and right now, his tactical position is deteriorating by the second. Those bombs are his last leverage, but he knows we'll eventually find them all. What he needs isn't escape. It's vindication. A chance to prove he can beat me one-on-one. Maria looked up from her laptop. Message sent. Using his personal encryption key, the one Volkov gave us. He'll know it's genuine. She met her brother's eyes. But James, if you're wrong about his psychology, I'm not. James checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. Men like El Fantasma don't build private armies just for profit. They do it because they need to prove something. Right now, his reputation is destroyed, his forces are captured, and his plans are exposed. But if he can kill the Marine commander who ruined him, that's a story that would restore his standing in the cartel world. Marcus's voice cracked through their comms. Command, message incoming on the same channel. El Fantasma's agreed to meet, sending coordinates now. The tactical display showed a location in the industrial district, a partially constructed office building overlooking the harbor. Perfect sight lines, multiple escape routes, and enough open space to make concealed backup impossible. He's picking the ground, Santos observed. Making sure you can't stack the deck like you did at the harbor. James nodded, his expression showing professional approval. Good, that means he's still thinking like a special forces operator, still playing by the rules of engagement he learned in whatever unit he served with before turning mercenary. He checked his watch. Which means he's forgotten the most important lesson about fighting Marines. Maria looked up from her ongoing documentation of events. Which is? We don't follow rules, James replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. We make them. And right now, I'm about to teach El Fantasma the difference between Special Forces training and Marine Corps innovation. As James geared up for the meeting, Maria continued typing, her words capturing the tension of the moment. The cartel commander thought he could defeat the Marines through superior numbers, equipment, and tactical doctrine. Now, with his forces scattered and his plans in ruins, he faces a final lesson in why some warriors can't be beaten by conventional means. The next hour would determine not just the fate of San Diego, but the future of cartel military operations on American soil. The sun climbed higher over the city as James prepared for his confrontation with El Fantasma. In offices and safe houses, throughout San Diego, federal agents continued processing captured mercenaries and seized equipment. But the real battle, the one that would determine the outcome of this entire conflict, was about to be fought between two commanders who had turned warfare into an art form. One fought for money and power, the other for duty and family, and only one would walk away from their final encounter. The half-constructed office building loomed against the morning sky, its exposed steel beams casting geometric shadows across the empty floors. James moved through the structure like a ghost, each step calculated, each angle covered. His earpiece remained silent. This was a solo operation, exactly as El Fantasma had demanded. But the Marine commander had spent decades learning that solo was a relative term. 20 floors up, he found his target waiting. El Fantasma stood by the edge of the unfinished floor, his tailored suit incongruous against the raw construction. Sight. The cartel commander's posture spoke of military training. British SAS, James guessed, noting the subtle details in his stance. Colonel Ramirez, El Fantasma's voice carried the cultured tones of an expensive European education. I must admit, your response to my forces was educational. I haven't seen tactical innovation like that since my days in Special Forces. James maintained his position, analyzing sightlines and potential threats. Former SAS, B Squadron? The way you planned the harbor assault had their fingerprints all over it. A slight smile crossed El Fantasma's face. Close. SBS, Special Boat Service. Maritime counter-terrorism was my specialty before I realized my skills were worth more on the open market. He gestured to the harbor below, where federal agents still processed captured mercenaries. Though perhaps I should have stuck with my original career. You should have done your homework, James replied calmly. Studied why they call us Marines. We're not just a fighting force, we're an adaptation to any combat environment. El Fantasma's smile faded. Oh, I did my homework, Colonel. That's why I arranged this meeting. He pulled out a phone, displaying a map of San Diego with pulsing red dots. 37 explosive devices, placed at critical infrastructure points throughout the city. My operators may be captured, but their last mission was quite successful. James noted the positions, his mind already calculating possibilities. And now you think you have leverage. Force us to let you escape, maybe negotiate the release of your captured operators. Nothing so crude. El Fantasma's voice hardened. This is about reputation, Colonel. The cartels watched me spend millions building an elite military force, only to see it dismantled by your Marines in a single night. My credibility, my entire business model, destroyed. He pocketed the phone. But if I can eliminate the Marine commander who humiliated me, that's a story that rebuilds reputations. The tension in the air crystallized as both men recognized the inevitable confrontation approaching. And the bombs? James asked, though he already knew the answer. Insurance. Your teams are good, Colonel, but they can't find and disarm 37 devices before my deadline. Unless, El Fantasma smiled again, cold and professional. Unless their commander can give them the exact locations. Information I'll provide after one of us is dead. James allowed himself a small nod of appreciation. Clean, professional. Turn a defeat into victory by eliminating the enemy commander and saving the city in one move. Your SBS training shows in the planning. While your Marine arrogance shows in your response, El Fantasma replied. Coming here alone, thinking you can outfight someone with my training and experience. His hand moved slightly, indicating readiness for combat. That's your first mistake, James said quietly. Thinking this is about fighting. He took a careful step forward. You've spent your career learning and teaching military tactics, but Marines, we learn to transcend tactics. El Fantasma's attack was explosive and precise, a combination of SBS close combat techniques and street-learned brutality. His first strike should have ended the fight immediately. Instead, he found himself hitting empty air as James seemed to flow around the attack like water. The battle that followed would be studied in military circles for years to come. El Fantasma brought decades of special forces training and combat experience. His techniques a lethal blend of multiple martial disciplines. But James moved with something beyond mere training, an almost supernatural awareness of space and momentum that turned each of his opponent's strengths into weaknesses. Impossible! El Fantasma gasped after a particularly devastating counter left him struggling for balance. Your file showed Force Recon training, but that's your second mistake, James replied, his breathing steady and controlled. Thinking, you can understand Marines by reading files. We're not just trained, we're evolved. Every generation learning from the last, developing responses to threats that don't even exist yet. The cartel commander's next series of attacks showed his growing desperation. Professional restraint gave way to increasing violence, as none of his techniques seemed to land effectively. James continued moving like smoke, each response calculated, not just to defend, but to demonstrate a deeper truth about the difference between their philosophies of combat. You trained operators, James continued, deflecting a vicious combination that would have crippled a normal opponent, taught them tactics, gave them expensive equipment, tried to turn them into an elite fighting force. But you never understood the fundamental truth about what makes Marines different. El Fantasma's frustration exploded into an all-out assault, his movements becoming more lethal but less controlled. And what truth is that, Colonel? James's counter was devastatingly simple, using his opponent's own momentum to send him crashing into a concrete pillar. We don't just fight, we adapt, evolve, become whatever we need to be to complete the mission. He stood over the struggling cartel commander. Your operators learned warfare. Marines. We become it. Blood trickling from his split lip, El Fantasma reached for his phone. The bombs, he gasped. You still need the locations. Kill me, and the city suffers. James allowed himself a small smile. That's your final mistake, thinking this confrontation was ever about fighting you. He touched his earpiece. Ghost Team, report status. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio, audible to both men. All devices located and contained, command. Maria's tactical analysis of their communications led us right to them. El Fantasma's operators might be good, but they still followed standard SBS protocols for covert device placement. Once we knew what to look for. The phone slipped from El Fantasma's fingers as understanding dawned. The entire meeting, it was just a distraction. Keeping my attention focused while your teams used your own tactical doctrine to track down your bombs, James finished. Like I said, Marines don't just learn tactics, we learn to transcend them. He zip-tied the cartel commander's hands with practiced efficiency. And we never, ever fight fair. As federal agents swarmed the building to take El Fantasma into custody, James looked out over the city his Marines had protected. Somewhere out there, Maria was already writing the story that would expose not just the cartel's military ambitions, but the fundamental flaw in their approach. They had tried to beat Marines by using military tactics, never understanding that Marines had evolved beyond mere warfare into something far more adaptable and lethal. El Fantasma had sought to prove that mercenaries could defeat Marines. Instead, he had learned why some forces couldn't be matched by mere training or equipment. The age of cartel armies had ended before it could begin, destroyed not by superior numbers or firepower, but by warriors who had turned combat itself into an art form that mercenaries could never hope to master. Through his earpiece, James heard Maria's voice. Story's ready, big brother. The world's about to learn why some enemies can't be fought with conventional means. She paused, then added softly, and why Marines will always be more than just soldiers. The sun climbed higher over San Diego as federal agents led El Fantasma away. The cartel commander had wanted to create a new kind of military force. Instead, he had learned an ancient truth. Some warriors transcend the very concept of warfare, becoming something that no amount of training or technology could overcome. The Marines hadn't just defeated his army, they had demonstrated why some forces remained unbeatable, not through superior firepower, but through their ability to adapt, evolve, and overcome any threat they faced. San Diego erupted into chaos at precisely 3 a.m. Multiple cartel strike teams, each composed of elite military operators, launched simultaneous attacks across the city. Power stations exploded, communication networks went dark, and emergency services found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the assault. In her secured observation post, Maria watched the tactical display light up with dozens of red indicators showing enemy forces. Command, multiple breaches detected, Marcus reported, from his overwatch position. These aren't normal cartel tactics. They're using advanced electronic warfare, drone support, even custom-modified combat vehicles. They've learned from El Fantasma's mistakes. James's voice remained steady as he coordinated the defense. Let them think they've evolved. Let them believe their combined military might can accomplish what El Fantasma's precision couldn't. He touched his tactical display, highlighting key positions throughout the city. All teams execute Operation Phoenix. Show them why Marines don't just adapt, we transcend. The cartels had indeed learned from El Fantasma's defeat. Their operators moved in unpredictable patterns, used sophisticated counter-surveillance techniques, and coordinated their attacks with professional precision. But as Maria documented everything for her final story, she saw the fundamental flaw in their approach. They're still thinking like soldiers, she observed, watching James's Marines systematically dismantle the cartel offensive, still relying on military doctrine, even if they're applying it creatively. They don't understand what makes Marines different. The difference became apparent as the battle unfolded. The cartel forces had expected the Marines to defend key positions, protect critical infrastructure, react to their initiatives. Instead, James's teams seemed to ignore conventional tactical responses entirely. They moved like ghosts through the chaos, striking from impossible angles, using the cartel's own aggressive actions against them. Multiple targets neutralized in Sector 7, came the report from Team 3. They're good, but they're fighting. The last war, still trying to counter the tactics we used against El Fantasma. James nodded grimly. Because they're mercenaries, professional soldiers fighting for money. They can learn new techniques, adapt their tactics, even improve their equipment, but they can't understand what they're really fighting against. The Cartel's carefully planned offensive began to disintegrate as James's Marines demonstrated why some forces couldn't be matched by mere military expertise. Each cartel team found its sophisticated tactics countered not by superior firepower or numbers, but by warriors who had evolved beyond traditional combat paradigms. Command, they're attempting to regroup, Marcus reported, pulling their forces back, trying to consolidate around the Federal Detention Center. Looks like a last-ditch effort to free their captured operators. Let them come, James replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Time to show them the difference between soldiers and Marines. The final battle for San Diego unfolded like a deadly chess match. The cartels brought everything they had: elite operators, advanced technology, perfectly coordinated attacks. But James's Marines moved through the chaos, like artists performing their masterwork, each action demonstrating why some warriors transcended the very concept of warfare. Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting the end of an era. They thought they could evolve, she wrote, transform their criminal enterprises into professional military forces, but they never understood that true evolution isn't about tactics or equipment. It's about becoming something entirely new. The detention center's perimeter erupted in gunfire as the cartels launched their final assault. Their remaining operators, the best of multiple organizations, executed their attack with flawless precision. But they found themselves facing opponents who had moved beyond the need for precision. Marines who had turned combat into something that transcended physical limitations. All teams, weapon-free, James commanded. Show them why we don't just fight battles, we redefine them. What followed would be studied in military academies for generations. The cartel forces, despite their training and equipment, found themselves engaged with an enemy that seemed to ignore the basic laws of combat. Marines appeared where no soldier could possibly be, struck from angles that defied tactical logic, and turned every carefully planned maneuver into a devastating counterattack. They're breaking, Marcus reported, his scope tracking fleeing operators. Not just retreating, completely breaking down. Their entire command structure is collapsing. James allowed himself a small smile. Because they finally understand. They're not fighting against soldiers or tactics or military doctrine. They're facing something they can never match. Warriors who have evolved beyond the limits of conventional warfare. As dawn broke over San Diego, the last cartel operators surrendered or fled. The combined might of multiple criminal organizations, their elite military forces, and their sophisticated equipment had been systematically dismantled by Marines who had demonstrated why some enemies couldn't be defeated by conventional means. Maria's final article would tell the story not just of a battle, but of a fundamental truth about warfare. The cartels had tried to evolve from criminal gangs into military forces, thinking that professional training and equipment could match any opponent. Instead, they had learned why Marines remained unbeatable, not through superior firepower or tactics, but through their ability to transcend the very nature of combat. It's over, she said quietly, watching federal agents securing the scene. They won't try this again, not after seeing what Marines can really do. James nodded, his mission complete, but his vigilance unchanged. They wanted to prove they could fight like a military force. Instead, they learned why some warriors can't be matched by mere soldiers. He turned to his sister. Your stories exposed their ambitions. Our Marines showed them the futility of those ambitions. As the sun rose over San Diego, Maria finished her final paragraph. The cartels sought to evolve beyond their criminal origins, building armies and adopting military doctrine, but they faced opponents who had evolved beyond warfare itself. Marines who had turned combat into an art form that no amount of training or technology could match. They came seeking to prove their military might. They learned instead why some forces remain unbeatable, not through strength or skill, but through their ability to transcend the very concepts their enemies relied upon. The city began to return to normal as emergency services restored power and communications. But something had changed forever. The cartel's dream of building private armies had died in San Diego, destroyed not by superior firepower or numbers, but by Marines who had demonstrated why true warriors didn't just fight battles. They redefined the very nature of combat. In the end, it hadn't been a contest between armies or a clash of military doctrines. It had been a lesson about evolution. The difference between forces that merely adapted and warriors who transcended the very concepts of warfare. The cartels had brought soldiers. The Marines had shown them why some enemies couldn't be fought with conventional means. As James and Maria watched the sunrise together, they understood that their victory wasn't just about protecting a city or stopping criminal organizations. It was about demonstrating an eternal truth. Some warriors evolved beyond the boundaries of normal combat, becoming something that no amount of training or technology could match. The cartels had tried to build armies. The Marines had shown them why true warriors didn't need armies to wage war.